Hey guys, Dr. Thompson here. And so I want to go over with you what I was going to go over, what I went over last week. And last week, we talked about like the first segment of how to raise healthy families, how to raise your next generation naturally drug-free. And so this week, I want to talk about the debate when it comes to antibiotics. So antibiotics. So coming from someone who actually grew up on tons and tons and tons of antibiotics and whose health was just absolutely destroyed from taking frequent rounds of antibiotics. So let me start off by having a disclaimer. I would never, ever want to go back to the days where antibiotics didn't exist. So there definitely is a benefit to having antibiotics today. There's no doubt about it. There's no question. People ask me, they say, Dr. Nate, would you ever go on an antibiotic? And I actually tell them, I say, yes, absolutely. Here's when I would go on an antibiotic. If I was taking a tour of a water treatment plant and I accidentally fell into a giant pool of sewer water, and I got a massive dose of, I don't know how to say, feces and a bunch of waste products. And all at once, I probably would consider actually going on an antibiotics. And there's no doubt that antibiotics have saved people's lives. However, we're running into a lot of problems when it comes to antibiotics. It seems today we're getting antibiotics for everything. And in fact, if you look at what the definition of antibiotics is anti means against, and then bio means life. So in reality, antibiotics are against life. And so an antibiotic can actually kill a bacteria. The problem is that it kills a whole heck of a lot of other things. So it's kind of like this. Let's say you have an annoying fly on the wall, and you could just use a fly swatter, but instead you decide that you're going to use a bowling ball instead. So here the fly is on the wall, and you decide that you're going to throw a bowling ball at the wall, and lo and behold, you do in fact kill the fly. The problem is that when you throw a bowling ball at the wall, you do enormous collateral damage. And this is what we're doing, particularly in our kids, when it comes to antibiotics. Is that we may be getting rid of a quote-unquote ear infection. We may be getting rid of the bronchitis. We may be getting rid of the quote-unquote the bug, but we're, number one, doing an enormous amount of collateral damage. And number two, there are other options that you can do that can actually take care of it naturally. So let me go over with you, and this is all kind of leading up to the event that we have coming up Saturday, March 17th from 9 to 11 here at Thompson Chiropractic Clinic, the Thompson Chiropractic Clinic, on raising healthy families. Like, how do you raise your kids naturally to be drug-free? And the reason why is if you look at the number of kids who have conditions today, it is absolutely astounding. The number of kids who have asthma, the number of kids who have chronic allergies, the number of kids who have food allergies today. Can you believe that? The number of kids with different egg and peanut, dairy allergies. We're seeing that like never before. And so there's got to be a better way. So I want to show you a better way, because I have 3 kids at home. And by the time I was at their age, had been on massive rounds of antibiotics. By the time that I was 10, 11 years of age, yet my kids being 11, 9, almost 7, have never had an antibiotic, never, not once. And so it is definitely possible, is definitely doable. And but first, what I want to show you is I want to show you the dangers behind antibiotics. Okay, so this isn't just taking something and we just wipe out the infection. In fact, here's what we're seeing right now: is we're seeing antibiotic resistance like never before. And the reason why is because we're getting antibiotics for everything, and the bacteria that actually survive the antibiotic, they now become antibiotic resistant. And so now when it comes down to maybe the 2 to 3% where we needed an antibiotic, now those things are actually useless against them. So we can keep trying to find new ways to do it, but I'm going to tell you something, is that nature always wins, is that you can't fool nature. Now, these are the reasons why, when it comes to antibiotics, why we don't give them for our kids. And this is the reason why right here. So we think that antibiotic use is fairly benign, that is really no kind of repercussions with it. But this is actually comes from peer-reviewed scientific journals studying antibiotic use in children. So number one, if a child takes antibiotics in the first year of life, it quadruples or increases the risk 4 times their risk of developing asthma, allergies, and hay fever, which, by the way, I had by the time that I was 4 years of age. So just 1 round of antibiotics increases in their first year of life, increases the risk of allergies and asthma by 4 times. Number 2, antibiotics is associated with fatal breast cancer. And what that means is it means that the more rounds of antibiotics that you're on, the higher risk women had of not only developing breast cancer, but actually developing fatal breast cancer. Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune disease of the gut, is linked to prior antibiotic use. And using antibiotics more than 10 times just in childhood increases the likelihood of developing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or cancer that affects the body's lymphatic system. So if you're following me here, long-term antibiotic use leads to asthma, allergies, hay fever, and cancer later on in life. So that right there is absolutely incredible. If you can believe that's just taking an antibiotic. So why do so many people take antibiotics? You know, the Journal of American Medical Association has actually said, and they come out with like brand new announcements about every 3 to 4 years, and they say this. They say, doctors, please stop prescribing antibiotics for ear infections. The reason why is that they say that most ear infections are actually viral. And so taking an antibiotic for an ear infection is completely useless. Well, Dr. Nate, my child got better by taking an antibiotic from the ear infection. Well, that's because most ear infections will heal on their own within 2 to 3 days. And so while you're taking the antibiotic, the body is actually working on healing it on its own. So that antibiotic is, number one, completely useless. But number 2 is that now you're doing all of this collateral damage. So why do doctors still give antibiotics for ear infections? And the reason is this. It's because if you have a sick child and you take the time, take the effort to take a screaming child and sit in the waiting room and go in the doctor's office and wait for 2 to 3 hours, well, the reason why is the doctor is giving you something is because, quite honestly, parents want something. They don't want to leave the doctor's office empty-handed. And doctors are sometimes even worried that, hey, if I don't give them something, they're going to be mad or angry. Maybe they might go somewhere else. But the American Medical Association has actually said, stop giving antibiotics for ear infections because most of them are actually viral. Now, listen, if your child has ear infections and has frequent ear infections, it's not because they have a lack of antibiotics inside of their body. The reason why they're having ear infections is because the body's not adapting. And in fact, when we see kids with ear infections, the longest an ear infection will ever last for, and my kids have had a couple of ear infections, but these are ear infections that last for maybe 2 to 3 hours, and they're not lasting for 2 to 3 days, and they're certainly not lasting for a whole entire month. And I've had instances where parents are saying, Dr. Nate, my child has been on an antibiotic for the last 6 weeks straight because we can't seem to get this ear infection under control. And so usually what happens is if a child is getting ear infections, it's antibiotics, 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 and then finally they're going in and putting tubes in the ears. Now, they even done research on whether leaving the ears alone or putting tubes in the ears, if that was actually beneficial. There's a greater benefit to putting tubes in the ears. And now the research shows that there is actually 0 benefit, not 1, versus leaving the ears alone versus actually putting tubes into the ears. So I know you're wondering, you're like, well, what on earth then are we supposed to do? Well, how you do this is that you work on your child's health so that they don't have ear infections in the first place. So how do you do this? So rather than trying this struggle and this fight against trying to fight all of the bugs because Mother Nature will always win. You work on creating health, and you don't work on fighting sickness and fighting disease all the time. So in our family, we work on creating health. Now, when it comes to the immune system, like some of the top things that you can do for your kids to make sure that their immune system is working the way it's supposed to, so they're not having the allergies, the asthma, the ear infections, is number one, these kids who are having ear infections or they have low immunity, usually when you look back, they've had some level of birth trauma, which directly interferes with the nerve system, which then directly interferes with the strength of the immune system. So a child who's got any kind of damage from birth trauma in the upper part of the neck falls down the stairs looking at an iPad all the time or chronically looking down either macro trauma, micro trauma, then that causes damage to the nerve system, which then compromises the strength of the immune system. Listen, if the neurology can't get into the ears, the immune system can't get into the ears, and the ears can't drain, then that ear actually acts as almost like a screen catcher for bacteria and for viruses. Number two, we make sure that we're not giving our kids tons of junk food that are actually producing more mucus. So there's certain foods, things like pasteurized dairy. That's one of the biggest ones. A lot of like wheat that is heavily processed, that contains glyphosate, like we talked about last week. These things can create an immune response with them, which will produce more mucus in the mucous membranes. And some of the mucous membranes are in the throat, nose, sinuses, in the ears. And you know, those are probably two of the biggest things that you can do to make sure that your kids aren't getting ear infections all the time. You got to improve neurology, and you got to make sure you're not giving your kids junk food. And if you do that, they will be well and they will be healthy. And here's the reason why. They're designed to be healthy. They have an inborn, innate intelligence inside of them. Everyone has it. And if they're getting sick, it's not because they have bad ears. It's not because mom had it. It's not because dad had it. It's because you're interfering with it. So the first step is take full responsibility and start doing something about it. Now, all of that is all well and good. And we're going to talk more about this, obviously, Saturday, March 17th, 9 to 11 a.m. at Thompson Chiropractic Clinic in Yorkville, Illinois, at Raising Healthy Families. I'll leave the link in the comments so that you can register directly. So we're going to go how to make your child bulletproof, how to not only have massive health, but when they have massive health, they also have massive intelligence, a bigger, a better brain. So it's up to us to make sure that we're giving our kids the best chance to be healthy as possible. Now, here's the next thing. What do you do, Dr. Nate? Because I have this question a lot. They say this, Dr. Nate, that's all well and great, but like, what do you do when there's a crisis? What do you do in the moment when there's some kind of emergency? So listen, obviously, we want to work on never having those crisis or emergencies, but sometimes they come up. And the goal is to have those come up less and less and less. So like, what do you do for crisis management? So Dr. Nate, my child has an ear infection. What am I supposed to do? Well, number one, you don't give them Tylenol. You don't give them aspirin. Those things are toxic to the body. You know, aspirin or Tylenol, for example, acetaminophen, severely depletes glutathione inside of the liver. And that is the body's way to naturally detoxify. So taking Tylenol is really bad. Tylenol is horrible for the liver. So what do you do for crisis management? So let's say my child is sick, and you know my children have been sick like a handful of times, but if they're only sick for a couple of hours. And so we make sure that they're getting adjusted. We're making sure that we're cleaning up their nutrition, especially if we've been a little bit lax, and we have been sometimes. But like, what do you do in that crisis? So let's say that there's an ear infection, for example. One of the things that we use is essential oil. So first thing that I'll do is I'll actually adjust my kids immediately. Now, I understand that you're probably not going to have access to a chiropractor immediately. So what you can do in the meantime is that you can use essential oils, And essential oils actually there's essential oils out there that actually perform better than antibiotics themselves without all the harmful side effects. So they don't destroy the gastrointestinal system. They don't wreck the immune system long term. So there's some really good essential oils out there that can help in the short term. One of them would be oregano. So oregano oil is great for bacterial infections. Another one would be clove oil, which is really good for bacterial infections. In fact, one of the things that you can do is you can take a cotton ball and you can actually put a small amount of clove oil on that cotton ball and then stick the cotton ball directly into the ear and then allow that just to be able to just kind of sit in there and help to kind of bring that infection down just a little bit. The other thing that we'll do is we may diffuse essential oils to help increase the immunity. Clove oil is good. Oregano doesn't smell very good. But one thing that we use is like orange peel, things that we use specifically doTERRA's On Guard, great for raising the immune system, and it's good for crisis and management. So, switching out the drugs and using things like essential oils is kind of like giving yourself a medicine cabinet makeover. So here's what you do. Number two is like when that's happening, number two, what you do is you start identifying causes. So rather than just run to the doctor and get your next round of antibiotics or putting tubes in the ears or going onto an inhaler or, doing all these things, you really need to sit down and spend some time and figure out, gosh, where are we interfering? So why is my child's immune system weak? Are there any kind of problems in the gut? So what am I feeding my children? How many rounds of antibiotics have they been on? Do my children have any kind of food allergies or food intolerances? For example, having chronic sinus issues or having chronic tonsillitis can actually food insensitivities and allergies can be a trigger for that. So we've seen, kids who've come in and their tonsils are touching. They're so swollen. Once we started increasing nerve supply, once we started getting proper vitamin D inside of their system, once we eliminated any kind of like bad foods that they were having reactions to, the tonsils went down, went back to normal. And guess what? We got to save the tonsils because the tonsils are actually needed in order to filter out toxins as they go into the lungs. When you identify those things, you have a well child. And it's not that hard, guys. It's easy to do. You just have to identify it and be willing to do it. So, guys, I hope you found that this was, you learned a lot from it because, listen, our kids are suffering. And if we're, as parents, are too busy to address the health of our kids, that's what we want most for our kids, for them to be happy, for them to be healthy. If they're growing up and they're not that way. So Saturday, March 17th, 9 to 11 a.m., Thompson Chiropractic Clinic, Raising Healthy Families. And remember, when you register for Raising Healthy Families, we'll also be giving you a discount off of our in-body body composition testing. This is going to be really awesome. So we'll be doing that as a thank you to you. So make sure I will leave the link to register for it in the comments. So make sure that you see that. Make sure that you register. And listen, your kids are worth it. So next week, we're going to be answering the question that a lot of parents ask me, say, Dr. Nate, how do I get my kids to whatever that is? Eat right, exercise, get off the couch, whatever it might be. And I'm going to show you the super secret on how you start getting your kids to actually doing the things to build health. Listen, if you don't teach them now, you're going to leave it up to them to learn on their own. So you have an amazing responsibility to teach your kids a lot of things. One of that includes to be healthy. So be well. We'll see you next week on how to get your kids to do all things healthy. Remember, Raising Healthy Families, March 17th, 9 to 11th. Get registered before space runs out. We'll see you next week.